Good morning. We're at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Jody Deegan, Training Accountability Coach with Nexstar. And this is the second in a series of Tap In Live webinars where we're going to talk about the 10 steps of the TAP program. So on our last one, we talked about setting up our training plan, organizing that so that we have an intentional training approach so that we know what we're going to train on and we have a definite direction for how that's going to go. So this is an interactive session, so I highly encourage everyone to get involved. If you have questions on your dashboard, you can raise your hand. I can call upon those, and if I can just get someone to raise their hand right now, we can test the audio and make sure that you can actually hear the sound of my voice. I would appreciate that. No hands? No hands? All right. We're going to move forward in the blind here. There we go. Thank you. All right. Beautiful. Okay. Thank you. All right. So let's jump on in. So today we're going to talk about how to deliver that training, so you can get the most impact from the training that you deliver, how you can channel that Nexstar magic, and even though when you go to a Nexstar training event, it might be a 3-day course, 2.5-day course. It's no less critical that you deploy a lot of those same techniques and best practices in the service center training that you're having in your meetings. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the common challenges that we see with training. And it's almost like we all got the same memo 20 years ago about how to hold our meetings. We're gonna, and these are not best practices. These are kind of the opposite of best practices. But a typical service center meeting, and believe me, I've been guilty of this myself, goes for an hour to an hour and a half. I'm going to stand up in front of the room and drone on. We don't make it interactive. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff. We're going to throw in 8 to 10 different topics, and at the end of that meeting, our employees are not engaged. They didn't really enjoy the experience, and we don't get a high level of retention from that. So what we're going to focus on today is how can you make your meetings interesting? How can you get a higher level of retention for the material that you're presenting? And there's some definite structure involved in that. All right. So what we're going to draw upon right now are, what are the objectives for those meetings? What do we hope to achieve in our weekly training sessions with our teams? And so from my mindset, for the most part, we're going to talk about delivering service system training, but these steps really apply to any type of training that you're going to do, whether it's technical or a general meeting. But from my mindset today, we're really talking about how to deliver your weekly service center service system training with your team. So the first thing is, what is the objective? What do you hope to achieve? And we have a fantastic course within Nexstar called Training Mastery. And if you haven't been through Training Mastery, I would highly encourage that, because today's call is going to be a really, really short snapshot of some of the best practices that we share in Training Mastery. So high impact course, one of the most intense classes that Nexstar offers. So the first thing is, what do we hope to achieve? And again, we want to have a laser focus with our meetings so that we're talking about one thing, okay? What is the objective of today's meeting? And if you're talking about closing invoices and all these other things that we talk about that we call housekeeping things, if we're talking about technical training, driving safe, we've got to have some safety in there, and the new contest and the new marketing piece and blah, blah, blah. Oh, and we got to throw in a little service system training in there too. You're just sending too many different messages. And so your chance of really getting a high level of retention from what you hope, what the main objective is here, you're going to be disappointed. So laser focus, one thing. So if our training today from our training plan is that we're going to focus on delivering a service system topic, then that really should be the only thing that we're focused on for today's meeting. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the length of the meeting. Those of you that have gone through Training Mastery know that in Training Mastery, we coach that meeting, your training, should be 20 to 30 minutes long. And if you have a meeting that runs longer than that, 45 minutes, hour and 15, whatever, you're not going to get the same level of engagement, involvement, and retention. Okay, so that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, keep your meeting laser focused. Try to keep that to 30 minutes, and we're going to get into the structure of what that content should look like. Let's talk about your training environment. Um, Training rooms, in my experience, are one of those areas where we see them every day within our business. Okay, and maybe your training area is a common space that we purpose for a lot of different things. But I'd really challenge everyone to step back, look at the environment where you're delivering your training. Is it impressive? Is it amazing? Is it clean? Or is it full of all the things that have been laying there for the last 6 months or longer? Do we still have burners from water heaters laying in there from when we did technical training 6 months ago? And training rooms, in my experience, really can become a catch-all for a lot of junk. Um, for example, if we bring a vendor in and we're talking about equipment or a product, and they bring in cases of brochures, not unusual for those things to take up residence in your training room. All right, so really take an open look, a new fresh look at your training environment with a new set of eyes. And if you need to, freshen it up, a little new carpet, a little paint, maybe some new AV equipment that actually works. Yeah, these are important things because we talk a lot about how we expect our employees to show up for work, how they interact with the customer, how they should look. We want clean uniforms, clean trucks, all these things. We want those invoices to be crafted a certain way. But if we don't have a training environment that really mirrors that behavior, we're probably sending a conflicting message to them. Okay, so really take a look, and if you need to freshen it up, clean it up, make it pretty, make this an environment that you're proud of. And for those of you that have been to the Nexstar offices in St. Paul, when it was first proposed that we were going to take this into an urban environment, that we were going to do a training facility on the 21st floor of the U.S. Bank building, there were a lot of us at Nexstar that really kind of thought that was crazy. And it was actually really a genius idea because our goal was to create a different environment. So when you go away to plumbing, heating, air conditioning, or electrical training, you really kind of expect that to be in a tilt up down in the industrial part of town. And when folks come to St. Paul and they're downtown, they're on the 21st floor of a skyscraper, and it's like, wow, this is really not what we expected. And we did that all very intentionally because we are trying to create a difference in how we view ourselves. So the result that you're looking for from your training facility in your building is no different. You really try to create something special so that you can get some impact there. Create an environment that empowers you. Okay. Another thing that plays into that attitude, that atmosphere that we lean on is music. And if you've been to a Nexstar event, we always have music. Now, we use music for 3 different things, and I'm going to talk about each one of those a little bit separately. But as it relates to creating an attitude or an environment, when you walk into a training at a Nexstar event, we always have music on, and it's typically feel-good music, positive, lively, upbeat, not polarizing, because not all of your employees are going to enjoy the same type of music. But you want to have music playing that makes everybody feel good. Okay, so you're creating a certain feel-good, positive atmosphere. Okay, your lighting in your room also plays a part of this. If you have lights or fluorescent lights that are burned out, it's kind of dim in there, that's another area to take a look at. Right? So it should be a nice, fresh, bright, positive environment. The other reason that we use music is for control. And as you walk into a Nexstar training event, we always have the timer going. And so you know exactly how much countdown you have before we start the training. And then one of the things you may not notice is we elevate the volume of that music about 3 to 5 seconds before the timer expires. We bring the level of that music to a loudness where your subconscious mind really kind of notices, hey, that music just got loud. And then when the timer goes off, we abruptly kill that music. And that's a control element because everybody instinctively stops talking and looks to the front of the room to find out what just happened. Oh, what's going on? Oh. So that's another technique that you can use in your service center. Music can really help you control your group and start the meeting in a more professional way. We also use that same technique when we do table group exercises, skill practice, breaks, lunch, anytime that we want to create that control element and create a certain environment. Now, the third reason that we use music in our training is also for white noise in the background. So if you have white noise in the background while you're doing a skill practice, a table group exercise, or even a break or a lunch, we want to really encourage group interaction and participation. So by having that music on in the background, that allows people to feel more comfortable having conversations, engaging in conversations. If the room was quiet, people become more self-conscious. So white noise in the background promotes interaction. That's the third reason why we use music in training. About the only time when we don't have music on is when we're actually delivering content or if we're doing an individual exercise. So in other words, you're sitting at your table, you're not supposed to be interacting with your table mates, and that's when we keep the room quiet, like a library. Okay. Does anyone have any questions so far? And if you have a question on your control panel, you can raise your hand, and again, feel free to have this be interactive. Give everybody just a moment there. Negative. Okay, no worries. Let's move on. Next, we'll talk about the structure of your training. So we recommend really having a defined 4 separate components of your training. And so we do the same technique with the Nexstar, even though the training that we deliver might be 2 days long, 3 days long. We still chunk our content down into bite-sized pieces so that it's interesting, it's interactive. It doesn't feel like you're listening to a 3-day sermon, because nobody wants to do that. So the first part of the training is the opener. And I would say the opener is probably one of the most important parts. Okay. So the opener is a really critical piece because this is where we open up the mind of our attendees and really bring them into the training. Okay. So if you're technician, you're coming in for service system training this morning, you're not always a morning person, or you're not always excited about showing up and sitting in the seat and being involved in the training. And so the whole point of the opener is to really draw them in, to open their mind up so that they're ready to receive training. And this is really a critical step. And for those of you that have gone to any Nexstar training, we always start out with some type of an opener, and it's usually the same opener. So if you'll think back to when you went through a training mastery, leadership mastery, service system, service management class, we typically start out with an opener that would be the high five exercise, the fist pump. And the reason we do that is because we want to make people comfortable with interacting with other attendees. And these are typically rooms full of strangers. So we want to make everyone feel comfortable meeting other folks, interacting, kind of breaking the ice. And so that wouldn't be the same opener that you would use for your weekly meetings, but it is still an opener. All right. So we rely very heavily on the learning pyramid to make things interactive. Okay, so the learning pyramid is a very important part to this. So how this ties into the opener is having an opener that is interactive is very important, so that people are interacting, and that's where the real learning and the comfort takes place. So let's talk about the Facilitator evaluation form. And this is a tool that I've got. If you don't have this or know where to find it, just pop an email to me, jodyd@nexstarnetwork.com, and I can send this to you. But the Facilitator evaluation form, as you notice, looks a lot like a curbside feedback. But this is a tool that's designed to help you reevaluate your meeting. If you had a meeting that was just fantastic, we had this great meeting, this is a tool that you can go back to and use it and say, hey, how was my meeting? Where did I lose them? What went wrong? Or maybe it was a fantastic meeting, over the top. this is a great tool. So why don't we take this and use this whenever you have that meeting that you really want to do a self-evaluation on, just like we encourage our technicians to do on a curbside feedback. Okay. So let's talk about the opener. So this actually breaks down the parts of this. So number one, does your opener open the lid of the participants? In other words, does it bring them into the training? Does it open their mind up so that they're ready to receive content? Because when our guys come in the morning for training, you know, they might be thinking about the drive, maybe the traffic was bad, maybe they're already stressed out. They're thinking about the job they've got today, are the parts in the bin. There's all these distractions, all these things. And then we pull them in and we want them to be 100% attentive to the training that we're doing. And that's just not always reality. So we really want to focus on the opener. And this lines out some of the key components of having a great opener. Did it tap the power of the pink lines? Now that's a term from a training process that we use in Nexstar. Pink lines are the lines of communication between the participants. In other words, is your opener interactive? Are people interacting? And that's what pink lines are. Did we create emotional security? Now, what that means is, are we making people feel safe in the training? If people feel like they're going to get pulled up on the front of the room or embarrassed or humiliated for some reason, you're not really going to get great involvement in your meeting. So create a safe environment. Another thing that we're very focused on within Nexstar, and if you'll think back on it, this will all make sense. We evolve from safe to unsafe. And what that means is when you come into a training room and you sit down at your table, you're safe. You're in your little cocoon. You're not really interacting with folks. And, you know, we're just sitting there in our safe zone. And then we ask you to join a table group. So typically we start with an individual exercise, and then we transition into a table group exercise. And then you're interacting. So that means you're a little farther out of your safe zone because you're having to deliver, interact, you know, you've got a little more anxiety. Now, some poor soul in that table group is the table group leader and scribe. Okay. So the table group leader and scribe is the person who has to have a little bit more anxiety. They have to stand up and deliver this content. And so we're elevating their level of unsecurity a little bit more. And then at the end, the facilitator will ask, who has something else that they learned at their table group that they would like to share? And then you usually get 2 or 3 folks that want to raise their hand and they share. So what you're witnessing in that whole start to finish process is an evolution from safe to unsafe. And again, one of the things that we've done wrong, you know, as an industry for years is we'll pluck 2 of our technicians out of the seats and bring them up to the front of the room and have them perform for it. And there's no evolution of safe to unsafe when we do that. So this is an important part. And the final point on the opener should be relevant to the content. So I'll give you a couple of examples of openers. So for those of you that have seen the C1 video, Date Night is a great example of how you can really incorporate an opener. And as we talked about on our last Tap In Live, we've got the facilitator guides and the participant worksheets that accompany the customer first video series. So a lot of times when you go, not all the time, but most of the time when you go back to your facilitator evaluation form, you can really take a look at that and it will walk you through how to facilitate the opener, okay, and the content and the skill practice. Those are meant to help you deliver the training in line with the structure that we're talking about today, right? So let's look at Date Night. Date Night's a fun video. The technicians usually, you know, receive it pretty well. And it talks about how is preparing for a date kind of like preparing for a service call. And so a great opening exercise, for example, your opener for Date Night could be, in a moment, I'll invite everyone to think about their dream date. If you could go on a date with, who would your dream date be with? Where would you go? What would you eat? What would you drive? What would you wear? And I'd like you to think about, what would 3 things be that you need to do to prepare for that dream date? All right. And so I know from experience, the guys have fun with this one. All right. They're going to joke around about it, and you know, they're going to come up with some fun stuff. And that's okay, because the point of the opener is to get them involved in the training, all right? Get their attention. And then we transition into the content, which is actually showing the C1 video or the wake-up call. I'll give you another example of an opening exercise, and there are several, and we actually have some tools with icebreakers that we can share. But I had a call with another member a few months ago, and I asked them how their meeting went. We were recapping the service center meeting that he had that week, and I asked him about his opener, and he said, you know, I actually didn't do an opener because I had a manufacturer's rep come in from Bradford White. And so we didn't do an opener. I didn't really follow the structure. And I said, well, don't you think it's still important to follow it? Would you have better training if you had? And he said, yeah, I guess so. I never really considered it. And so we discussed, what could you do for an opener? What would be an example of an opener that you could have done for that water heater training? And we came up with something like this. And there's no one opener. There's several that you can think of. But if you've got a room full of plumbers, and you've got a Bradford White water heater guy there, and we're going to get into water heaters and features and benefits and all that fun stuff. An opener could be, in a moment, I'd like everyone to consider, think about the worst water heater that you've ever seen. This could be the most roached out, poorest condition, might be the worst application or the poorest install. I'd like you to think about what made that water heater so bad. Why does that stick out in your mind? What questions do you have? Ready, begin. So you give them a moment to process that, to think about it. You could make this interactive, pair them up with a learning partner, or do it as a table group. And again, how you facilitate the interactive part of these openers might depend on the size of your group too. So smaller shops, you may just have this be a table group exercise. You know, if you've got a larger shop, you're going to pair them up with learning partners. But at the end of this, you're going to say, okay, who would like to share their water heater story? And if you've got a room full of plumbers, I guarantee you every one of them wants to tell their story about this roached out water heater that they saw in the past. They're going to have one that sticks in their mind. So then we transition into the content. So that's another example of using an opener to draw people in. And again, I believe that the opener is the most important part of your training, because if you ever have the meeting that you don't get high engagement, you've got folks looking at their phones, or the arms are crossed, the body language is bad, go back to your facilitator evaluation form, go back to your opener. Really take a look at it. Did I do a great opener? Did I do any opener at all? Because that's usually where we lose them. All right, before we move on to the next section, do we have any questions? Okay, we'll move on. So the opener should be about 3 to 5 minutes long. Okay, fairly brief part of your training, but a critical one. Okay, so next we get into the content. The content is the meat of what we're going to train on. And so this could be showing the C1 video, could be showing a wake-up call. If the focus of your meeting is technical training, that would all be the content. And so the length of the content should be fairly short as well. Again, we're trying to maintain a 20 to 30 minute runtime for this meeting. So your content really is going to be about 8 to 12 minutes long. All right. So, and if you look at the C1 videos, the wake-up calls are typically designed to be anywhere from about 5 to 10 minutes tops, because we know that if these were 30, 40-minute training sessions, people would check out on you, right? So these are really, the content is delivered in bite-sized pieces, laser focused on what the content is and what do we hope to get out of it. So that would be the content. Now in the evaluation form, the content and the skill practice are lumped in together into the processing section. So did we design processing time primarily around the bottom two tiers of the learning pyramid? So let's go back up to that learning pyramid for a moment. Now, if you go back to high school, and we think about our classic high school learning example where the teacher's in front of the class droning on, you're lucky to retain 5% of that information. All right. So you're not going to get a high level of retention when the teacher's up in front of the room, just droning on. If you add some reading and audio visuals, you can improve that a little bit. But as you can see from the learning pyramid, the bulk of the learning takes place at the bottom of the pyramid. So when we're doing group discussions, table group exercises, or if we're teaching others, that's really where the bulk of our learning starts taking place. So within any Next Start training event that you'll go to, we're always very conscious of the run time. In other words, how much time do we spend talking? And then we always follow that up with skill practice, because we know that discussion of what we just listened to, what we just heard, is where the real learning takes place. So, and even though your training and your service center might only be 20 to 30 minutes long, consciously forming your training so that you always incorporate some type of skill practice or interaction in there is a really critical piece. And sometimes it's challenging, because it's really easy to stand up there for half an hour and drone on, cut them loose, and then there's been no interaction. So be aware of that. On our next call, on the next Tap In Live that we're going to do next month, we'll take this one step further and get into building agendas and how having an intentional plan for how you deliver your meeting helps you deliver that better. But I didn't want to try to cover all that in one webinar today. It's a little too much. Okay. So let's go back to processing. Now, there are a couple of terms on this evaluation that if you haven't been through Training Mastery, you probably wouldn't be familiar with. But we want to have creative, unique props and activities. In other words, try to make this as interesting as possible. Spend less than 9 minutes in the green lines. Now, green lines is a training term from a training system that Nexstar adopted years ago. That these are the green lines of communication, which are from the facilitator to the participants. Now, earlier we learned that the pink lines were participant to participant communication. Green lines are from the facilitator to the participant. So try to spend less than 9 minutes at a time delivering the content in front of the room. Facilitate clear instructions. And if you've been to a Nexstar training class, really try to channel your inner Keith Mercurio. In a moment, I'll invite you to join me. We'll conduct the table group exercise. What questions do you have? You know, we call that invitational language, but you have to be very clear on how we deliver these instructions. All right. So the skill practice, the content are all in the processing sections together. So your content delivery, in other words, the C1 video, the wake-up call, or whatever your technical content, should only be about 5 to 8 minutes long. All right. Now the skill practice, let's talk about that a little bit more. The skill practice does not always mean that we're pulling two folks up and we're pairing them off and they're having to do the greet step or something like that. Go back to your experiences with Nexstar training. It's just a matter of getting folks up and interacting and talking about what they heard, what they listened. There might be times where a skill practice is what we traditionally call the role play, but not always. All right. A skill practice is just talking about the content. What are we going to do different here? What did you learn from this? What stuck out in your mind? What were your aha moments? So it's just talking about the training and talking about how we'll use it and what questions that we have with those. Skill practice, as you see, is the longest part of the meeting. So you really want to build in plenty of run time here to let folks interact, discuss the content, and talk about what they saw, what they heard, and what their perceptions of it are. And lastly, we've got the close. So the close is designed to close the lid of the participants. And what we mean by that is really try to flush out, do we have questions? If we've delivered this training, folks are typically going to have questions at the end of it, and we want to really flush that out. And if we have a room full of technicians, techs are, and I can say this because I was one, we're notoriously bad about raising our hand when we're confused about something because we don't want to look stupid in front of our peers. So as a facilitator, you really want to flush that out by asking questions like, what questions do you have? And really point, single folks out. Billy, how do you see yourself taking this information and using it today? John, what are you going to do different as a result of this training? How do you see this helping you? So really try to flush this out. And if you've got one person that's confused, you may have several people that are confused. So your job as a facilitator is to really try to flush that out, make sure that they have understanding, and then amplify and go in and really address those concerns. So the close is an important part. The other thing that lives in the close section of the training is if we have homework, if we have deliverables, or anything that you're expecting them to do. And so you might ask a form of question, is there any reason why we couldn't complete a summary of findings on every call that we go to this week? Great. So we're all in agreement. We're going to complete summary of findings on every call that we go to this week. We're going to bring those paper forms with us for next week's meeting because we're going to do an exercise around that. What questions do you have? Does everybody have these forms? So that would be another example of something that would live in the closing part of the training. All right. So, and there are also a couple of key points on here. Do we utilize the music effectively? Do we manage our time well? Was our language clear and concise? And then the close, about the same as the opener, should be about 3 to 5 minutes long tops. Okay. So we have, again, the training mastery class is a fantastic resource. Our trainers are just amazing. And so I would also recommend whenever you go to an XR training event, don't only appreciate the content that you're receiving, but really take some time to focus on the way that it's facilitated, because the NextStar training process is just unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. I'm not just saying that because I'm an NextStar employee. Our trainers are rock stars. The way they deliver training, they're phenomenal. So, but we've also got support in our training accountability coaches, me, Bill Fleming, Brittany Spencer, Bill Weaver. We've added some more training accountability coaches to our bench, and so it's going to give us a much higher level of support for our membership. So we're pretty excited about that. So I know I've delivered a lot of content. I certainly spent more than 9 minutes in the green lines, so I apologize for that. But what questions do you have? So if you have a question, feel free to raise your hand and I can call on you if there's anything that maybe I didn't touch on. All right. You can raise your hand, type it in, or I can unmute you. You're among friends here. No question? All right. We'll wrap this up. Our next Tap in Life webinar will be Friday, October 12th. And again, we're going to build on what we covered today on TAP Step 2, which will be creating meetings, meeting agendas, how to structure your meeting so that you've got the tools that give you the highest impact and the most retention of the content that you're delivering. So thank you all for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules, and have a fantastic weekend.